There we are. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the LCI Greenroom. I'm Jacob Winograd, host of the Biblical Anarchy podcast with the Libertarian Christian Institute, and this is part of our Christians for Liberty network. And I'm excited for tonight's conversation. We're going to try to cover a lot of ground in a little bit of time, which is always the good podcasting challenge. Or actually, it's one of the podcasting challenges. The other challenge is to take something that only takes 5 minutes to talk about and make it go on for a really long period of time. But tonight, we're not doing that. We're doing the other. We're doing the other kind of podcast thing. Of course, please make sure that you, wherever you're watching this, subscribe if you aren't already. If you're listening to the audio later, 5-star reviews always help. And you can find out more about what I do and what the Libertarian Christian Institute does by going to libertarianchristians.com. For tonight's topic, as the thumbnail says and the posts promoting this said, we're talking about wokeness, and not just the stuff coming from the left, but also the rise of tribalism and identity politics on the right. And not just in the context of the culture and society and politics, but also in the context of the libertarian movement, the Libertarian Party. You guys who listen to me regularly know that I've kind of been on this spiel for a while lately. Like my latest live stream conversation with Jim Babka, we got into a lot of this, and I've been kind of like, I think for the last month, including with Jeremiah here, kind of like alternating weeks where I talk to someone who's kind of from one faction side of the liberty movement and party, and then talk to the other side and, kind of get the different views on this current administration, the state of our culture, what the path forward is in terms of, trying to either find unity in the liberty movement or to see a more libertarian future. I would say that I don't have my mind made up on a lot of these things, but one thing I do have my mind made up on, I've always had, well, not always, since I became a libertarian, because of this, I've always been fundamentally opposed to identity politics. As most of you who know me are aware, I started out as a more left-leaning person, democratic socialist, and what pushed me out of the left and towards the libertarian movement and philosophy was the rise of identity politics on the left. And as such, because I was seeing my friends, my family, even myself for years called a Nazi and a bigot and racist and homophobic and whatnot, when there really was no strong evidence, or there was evidence to the contrary, and I felt like those words became meaningless. I felt like, what, we don't have a big problem of racism or bigotry in society. But I remember people who have kind of, they get this right, but only half right. I remember people like Jordan Peterson warning that the identity politics of the left could, if it keeps going, have a sort of negative blowback sort of consequence, where you would get people on the right saying, fine, if we're going to play identity politics, we're going to play it, and we're going to play to win. And so that does seem to be what's happening, much to my initial, maybe like, general skepticism towards all this. But it really just boils back to that, liberty is aimed and Christianity is aimed at the individual, at individual rights, and politics is often weaponized at putting people into collectives, because then it's easier to make them hate each other, easier to control them then at that point, because they're too busy fighting each other rather than looking at the fact that they're both in chains. So joining me tonight, again, two people who have been on the show quite a few times. I don't agree with these two gentlemen on a lot of things, including we just spent 30 minutes before we went live having to disagree about a bunch of other stuff before we got on. But this show has never been about having an echo chamber, and I actually think it's very intentionally the opposite of that, because I think liberty does not thrive in an echo chamber. Echo chambers just they just fuel this problem, right? In a free society, although you have the right to freedom of association, you do have to tolerate that there will be people, at some point in some scale, somewhat close to you, who you do not agree with, who don't share your worldview. And you have a choice of either, viewing them as your neighbor and living peacefully with them and engaging in free trade as much as you want to and leaving them alone otherwise, or to say that I think that their lifestyle is different than me, and that's a bad thing, and I need to use violence to control it. And everyone on this panel agrees that that is not the way forward, no matter where we might land on certain cultural issues. So we're going to talk about that, to start with, identity politics and the problem there, and then we'll kind of transition into, I think, modeling what I wish the liberty movement was a great example of and too often isn't, which is that when you take force off the table, we actually create the ideal space for the libertarian virtue of free speech to truly see its day, not just as the ability to criticize our governments, but the ability for us to engage in honest discourse, to learn from one another, to challenge one another in good faith, and then walk away still being friends who can live among each other peaceably. Jeremiah and Hodey, you guys have been on the show before, but if you guys want to give short, introductions, and then we'll get into it. Hodey, you want to go first?
I'm Hodey Johns. I'm with the Love First Christians. We are a free Discord-based community for people that like to focus on love. We have believers, we have non-believers, we have people who are curious. We have made amazing strides in this last couple of years, I guess. It's been really awesome. We're going through the entire Bible this year because we got a lot of new believers, right? Like new people that are kind of going through it for the first time. And being able to go through the Bible as a community, and I think it goes to the topic of this, having love first as the standard has helped us bypass a lot of nonsense. You know what I mean? We are all here. We all know what love is. We've all read the verse in Galatians. So we know as soon as we're not being patient, we're not being kind. You know what I mean? We're boasting. We know that we've
First Corinthians.
Oh, is that First Corinthians? I'm sorry. There we go. I pretend to have a theology degree, but I ran it through the dishwasher on accident. Now it's gone. So it just washed away with my brain. But we really want to emphasize that, and it's been a huge blessing. It was my outlet after getting booted out of politics and the Libertarian Party after the takeover and everything. I needed something, and it's just kind of reaffirmed that this was the right place for me. As you mentioned, Jacob, you're not feeling like a political creature, and I certainly that certainly has been true for me. At this point, even a functional Libertarian Party probably wouldn't be able to get me back, because what we're doing has been awesome. So I hate to brag about that too much, but if anybody here that sounds like their jam, you want to talk about even if you just want to make criticisms, if there's verses that you're like, I really don't like this verse, and you want like a wide variety of opinions without feeling like you're being judged for it, by all means, stop by. We'd be blessed to have you. No responsibility, no obligations. Love First Christians.
Awesome. So what you're saying is that you host the Belief Curious.
Yeah. High curiosity, low confidence is what we try to teach. We like people wandering.
Yeah, well, so I'll make this short because people have seen me 800 times on this channel already. So I'll just say, I'm your local mentally ill furry, here to display my my psychological conspiracy corkboard for all to see. I hate fascists. I'm here to hate them publicly because people don't do that enough. There's not a glut of that on the market at all. It's a very niche industry. Anyway, with that being said, I guess then I'll just start by saying, been in libertarian politics for too long, which is any amount of time. It's a gradually unproductive thing that has sucked a significant amount of my time away toward pursuits that don't actually result in any libertarian ends. And ultimately, I think politics is a mistake. But if we are going to have a libertarian movement, it should reflect the values of inclusivity, and a significant amount of them have based their libertarianism on I have the property right to be a bigot, and you have to deal with that now, and if you don't, you're going to be thrown out of a helicopter, or at least the party, or at least the movement, or at least this Facebook group, or at least something. It's very exclusive. It's very insider clubby, and I'm here to poke holes in echo chambers. And any of you out there who have any criticism of me, you can post it in the chat for all to see, so that we can say words about it, because I'm sure that there will be people who have words of negativity about some of this stuff, but no,
there always there always is. And I actually think another kind of point of unity here at the onset, which is rather humorous, is that I think we have sometimes all at the same time and sometimes at different times, but in general, we have some of the weirdest haters. The three of us. I've seen people go after all three of us, and it's just like, and first of all, it's always like, first of all, can you please just like, I don't know, attack me for something I've actually said, or a position I actually hold, which they often can't do, or it's just people being generally crappy online, which happens, but generally, yeah, weird haters, including sometimes, especially like I think Jeremiah, you get this, and I get this too. It's just like you'll get one or two specific like stalker haters that have this weird love-hate relationship with you and your, X posts and YouTube comments. So
yeah, they latch on. They don't have things in their real life. Everybody left them. Their online space is the only thing they have left, and they're making people leave on purpose because it's fun for them now.
Maybe they're allergic to grass.
Yeah,
that's why they can't touch it.
And that's like it really is that. So like a lot of the time, people act like being online is like praxis. It's not. I mean, there's some things you can do online. There's some ways that you can spread some ideas. There's some things that you can do in terms of scheduling things for meet space. There's, but in the end run of it, what online is most of the time is a personality contest. And a lot of personalities suck. So if you have a personality contest and you're having it with a bunch of other suck personalities, then you're probably going to try to suck the most so that you can get most of the suck bucks. And that's what a lot of these things turn into. They turn into like vapid, echo chambery, sort of like in-group, out-group bully fests with no actual substance. And like that's what a lot of things in the libertarian circles have turned into. That's what some things on the left and most of the right have turned into. That's the reason we started to have this conversation, because you were like, yo, I'm starting to see like you were not exaggerating about the Nazis. You weren't exaggerating about how bad this problem has gotten. So let's have a conversation about it.
Well, we could even call out some names here, I think, because I think one person in particular was Pete Quinoniz, who I had a recent spat with, and it's really tough. And I've actually tried to shy away from going after him publicly because Pete was actually, I considered him somewhat of a friend, and he was there for me during a tough time for my family when my dad was dying of COVID, and so it was actually just it's very depressing. And my dad's alive, by the way, but it was touch and go there for a while. But it meant a lot to me that Pete was, like there as a, compassionate person, checking in on me and, being very supportive and praying for my family. And so that earned like in general, my rule is that like I can tolerate a lot of disagreement on beliefs. If like we treat each other with mutual respect and whatnot.
You maintain being a decent human.
Right. And even if you're crappy with other people, I'll generally even sometimes overlook that as long as you're okay with me, because I don't want to be the hall monitor of the internet. I just don't have the time for that. I'm too busy trying to, make my behavior better than to try to go around and finger wag at other people for, because like who hasn't, I think a lot of us understand the temptation of social media to just go off and, treat people like, a-holes sometimes. But with Pete, it's just like it became, yeah. Well, with Pete though, it became this thing where it became, especially so like I think for a while, certain people had been trying to tell me, by certain people, I mean, the Fakertarians, which is one of the people that I mentioned to that we've all had negative run-ins with. Were trying to get me to say like, he's a Nazi. I think at one point I had said something like, Pete was right about something, or Pete is right about everything. It's kind of like a and people were like, oh, he's a Nazi, and I was just like, okay, like these are the people who called me a Nazi and doxed my house and home and threatened Antifa against me and my family. So it was like, I don't really care what you have to say as far as throwing that word around. But then when they saw you associating with me, and then instead of you freaking out, you went like, okay, well, here's the evidence, and you provided a lot more than what they did in terms of going into stuff, I went, oh no, that's pretty bad. And I think that was, that I wouldn't say that was the genesis, but that was the first moment where I had to, like, I was presented with something that made me go, okay, wow, all right, Pete really did fall down that JQ hole, and that's very disappointing. I hope he comes out of it. But then you start looking at, the people who watch his show and their comments, people on his, X posts and whatnot. And I started to realize this, especially then when, Rexenwald, after the failed presidential bid really went off the wall, dove into a lot of the same sort of JQ anti-Semitic conspiracy theory stuff. And I did a whole episode on it where I was just like, it's like, it's one thing to peddle just conspiracy theories. The other thing when people just make out flat out lies that are easy to disprove, like a lot of the stuff about like the Talmud and whatnot. And I was like, have you read this? Like, just go a lot. Like, rule of thumb, by the way, 99% of the time, if you see someone said the Talmud says this online, it's completely fabricated or like twisted or made up. So just, I don't know, do some basic fact checking. But yeah, it does seem there's been, a pretty, all across the board, anti-Semitism, white identitarianism that's sometimes just, very proudly white nationalist. I mean, Hodey, correct me if I'm wrong. I know you're among many who said that there was a problem in the right wing paleo libertarian sphere with being too friendly towards racism and bigots and whatnot. But I mean, I'm not crazy, right? Like, at least it's like I joined the party in 2018. I don't think things were like that then. It does seem like, and I don't know exactly when the tipping point was, but it's got, at some point it became cartoonishly bad like it is now. I mean, was it always there, or did it gradually happen, or was this sort of like, Trump campaign and all that a catalyst? I mean, what's your analysis there? I'd be curious what your insight is.
Yeah, as far as within like the liberty movement and the Libertarian Party and all that, it obviously there were the warning signs there, and at this point, I think we can pretty well vindicate a lot of those warning signs. But as you mentioned, why were they averse to them? Because they didn't like the messenger, right? They had a problem with the messenger. The message itself might have been important, but shoot the messenger, because there are legitimate problems with the messenger. And I understand that. And listen, this is human beings, right? Like, somebody makes fun of me for something that I actually need to change, and they're bullies. I put up that defensive wall. We talk about how shame cycles reinforce bad behaviors, right? Like, and they make me feel shame. They make me feel bad. They make me feel awful. And then you look at the way Jesus confronts, a tax collector or something like that. Totally different, One of these things with the woke right issue is not just the set of ideology, because they've formed different types of identity politics, identity groups, I guess, around different people, but that they engage in the same tactics. And really, that's actually, when you look this up online, this is what it means to be the woke right, is to engage in, I hate this video game because they have a gay person in it. Let's try to get it canceled. I hate this movie. It's not enough to not see it. I need to be canceled. I need backlash. I need anger. I need rage. That was always there. Like, to be clear, there is a presence there. And we said, what happens if we let it go a little further, until we get, as you mentioned, it's cartoonishly evil now. But those of us who were along for this ride over the last like 8+ years, this is a slow burn. Right? Like, we warned, hey, they're going to sell out for a Republican candidate, 8 years ago. It was kind of, oh, what a stupid criticism that is. And now it's true, it just is what happened. But, we want to see immediate results on predictions like that, on these kind of prophecies. Unfortunately, all politics is identity politics. If we talk about medical freedom, we're appealing to people that are hurting, or doctors or something like that. And those are identities, right? It's impossible. If you take identity out of politics ceases to function. There's a reason that Jesus says, there's neither man nor woman, there's no slave, no free, no Jew, no Gentile. You're all one in Jesus Christ, right? Because it's the tossing out of all politics. We're all one here. We're not identifying with some, piece of who we are at the expense of somebody else. We are all here to benefit God's kingdom. And so this is kind of where the reason I was so early into this, and the reason I landed myself on so many block lists by these people before I interacted with them, is because obviously my message is one of unity, love, understanding, respect. I wanted to transcend this kind of identity politics. The Libertarian Party, if it plays politics at all, needs to be one of trying to say, if we want as little government as possible, that means we need to play with identity as little as possible. And instead, what happened, we had people that were like, no, this is our identity, and we're just gonna talk trash against other people who it's not their identity. Or, I mean, there's no more hostile place currently to post like a pro-gay message than any Facebook group called Libertarian Anything. Right? It is the most hostile place on the internet you can go. You can go to a straight Republican site, right? Like, I mean, I can go to like an anti-gay coalition, post that, and I won't get nearly that kind of pushback. The thing is, this was always present.
We could share screenshots of my post in the Mises Caucus group.
Right. And the thing is we
infamous.
failed to recognize that as a problem, right? And we decided this isn't a problem. We're just going to get over it. We're not going to do anything about it. When we had these little inklings, it doesn't start bad. I'll end by a really good example. I think when people see J.K. Rowling, there's nothing she says that is particularly egregious. She doesn't understand the difference between sex and gender, and that's common stupidity, but I don't expect everybody to graduate high school biology. Like, I understand why people struggle with that, because your initial reaction, if we're being all reactionaries as cis people, I think all of us on this chat, is we hear about this concept and we're like, oh, that's a little odd, right? Until we've had that kind of education. Now, she didn't say anything outside of that. Right. Really, that's like, let's kill. In fact, she even said, if somebody was attacking your rights, I'd be marching with you in the streets. Now, people went ahead and attacked their rights in the States. She didn't end up marching with them in the streets. That's a shame. But why? How could we ever have known about this? Well, where did it start? Well, she had a history of saying misandrous things, but the left let her go. Why? Because it's against men. Who cares? They're men, right? Take a few crack shots. That's okay to be bigoted against them, right? It's the different kind of bigotry that they didn't like. And so she got away with that. She didn't say anything really bad, but what would happen, how we should have noticed, is she'll have something in her comments and you'll say like, hey, I really love your work, but here's a great place for education. You're talking about like gamete production and whatnot, getting involved in biology. Here's a study I think that you might want to see. You'll be instantly blocked. Right? Like, you're gone, even if you phrase it the nicest way possible. But if you go into her comments and you're like, I don't know about these trans people, and put it in quotes, yeah, you're fine. You're allowed to keep commenting. This idea that we're not responsible for the cultures around us, it is, I hate to quote Douglas Murray because he was so wrong on everything about Israel, but that is bogus. We need to be responsible for our cultures. And the idea that we could wave a white flag on it and expect, there's a reason why the Mises Caucus within 1 year went from we raised a white flag in the culture war to Angela McArdle within her first month of taking over saying it's all about the culture war. You don't get to wave a white flag. Politics is downstream from culture. You ignore culture, politics is going to override you. So, I mean, really, we should have seen it from the beginning. We didn't do anything about it. I know people like you analyze this with lefty issues all the time. You're going to end up falling for this. You're going to end up falling for this. This is where that path leads. It's time we do this about the right as well. And I think it's been good to kind of see this come to fruition of the woke right as they have completed the following in the footsteps of the left to the point they're, I mean, talk about crybabies, talk about made of marshmallows, right? We're yelling at paper towel dispensers now. Anyway.
No, those are good points. I mean, I resonate a lot with that. And even to the point where like, I can kind of like look back and see, like it's tough when stuff's happening like in the moment. You don't necessarily want to look back and do the retrospective, but looking back, yeah, I can recognize the irony to I used to be, including on your old show, be defending the Mises Caucus saying like, no, we're not shills for Trump. We would never support Trump. And fast forward a little bit later, those, someone could go back and clip those and make me look rather foolish right now. But Jeremiah, I want to ask you, so based on what Hodey said, here are my thoughts. Like, I think Hodey would agree. Like, there's nothing problem with identities separated from politics, and actually, I think there can almost be maybe you wouldn't want to call it identity politics, but you could almost say there'd be like a positive correlative, like opposite correlative to identity politics in libertarian spaces, which is actually, I alluded to this very infamous post I made in the Mises Caucus Facebook group on, I guess, like when Pride Month started, and I basically took the Mises Caucus logo. And by the way, you made this, by the way.
Yeah, I said if
yeah.
if you want to piss these people off. Yeah, and
yeah. Well, I don't remember. I think it was slightly a day or something like that. But I was just like, listen, like it's Pride Month. I don't really agree with this stuff. It's not my cup of tea. But I understand that there's people in the Libertarian Party and in the Mises Caucus who are gay, who like, and my thing has always been, I actually believed in the calling a ceasefire on the culture war, on the no identity politics stuff, but being like, hey, like my whole thing is being a Christian libertarian. And I'm always trying to like I kind of talk to everybody, but I especially talk to Christians. I especially go, here is the Christian case for a free society, for property rights, for being anti-war, for being pro-peace, right? And I don't really have a fundamental problem with someone who is, gay or trans, whatnot, and wants to do the rainbow flag stuff, doing that from like their angle. And my idea is that, like, you know what, like we don't even have to be like, hey, like maybe we're not going to be the bestest friends in society. We maybe wouldn't want to start a business together, although we could, we never know. But like, I want to support your right to live your life the way you want to do it, as long as you're not hurting people, because I would hope you would do the same for me. And there's a beauty in like, I always, I can never find it. I've looked for it, but there's this great meme that's just like, it uses like the conservative trad images, and they're kind of like, Amish based, and then there's like, these like lefty, more like I guess like, hippie or they're kind of like playing on stereotypes and caricatures, but they're like the ones like like trading with the Amish, like, oh, thanks you, like we really loved your, like your raw milk and your grass-fed butter and like products and whatnot. And the other one goes like, oh yeah, I really love these hemp products you made, and they helped with my, my wife's migraines or something. And it's like that's the future I want, right? Where like I understand that there'll be people who don't have my beliefs, my worldview and whatnot. Might even be things that I might have like strong aversions to be like, that's not the way I would want to live. As a Christian, I might think that those things are sinful. But at the end of the day, like that is a hard issue, not a political issue. And unfortunately, that isn't the way a lot of people, to be fair, I think there's a lot of people on the other side of again, I don't like to use sides here, but just, lack of a better descriptor. There are a lot of people in kind of like one vein, of the liberty movement who maybe sometimes I've experienced they're intolerant of, my Christian worldview. But in this case, I saw a lot of people being intolerant of this one. And I was just like, I don't know, like and I was like, fine, whatever. So if no identity politics means we can't even talk about our identities, that's weird, but okay. But that doesn't actually seem to be what it was from the get-go. It was actually, at least for a lot of people, no identity politics was, we just hate this particular group of people. Right. And that was never what and to be fair, I did see individuals like that, but I always kind of figured like, okay, whatever, like there's going to be the oddball hateful person, and as long as they're not like the forerunners, I don't really care. But now it's obviously grown from just a couple of individuals to a lot bigger of a problem. But I mean, do you agree with my analysis there in terms of like there should be room for a positive identity, or ability to coalesce with people who share a common identity within politics and libertarian spaces?
Yeah, well, so here's the thing. Like, I just got done drinking this. This, as you can see, is a red fluid, and that red fluid had sugar and electrolytes and some citric acid and that sort of thing, and it's comprised of ingredients, right? And I could say, right, that I just drank this, but nobody should object if I also then say that I drank a Powerade. because I drank a Powerade. The label is the identity of the product. The identity of the product describes the material conditions within the product. Without the label, the product is still the product. And so the identity itself is intrinsically linked to the product itself, right? The
Hashtag
label,
not sponsored.
right. Yeah, I mean, I don't like the Coca-Cola Corporation. I even got these for free. But like the label comprises the identity that is referred to when I would like this otherwise describe the ingredients, you know? Nobody wants to hear about modified food starch. Hey, do you want a nice hot bottle of modified food starch? You know, but if modified food starch is part of what makes Powerade great, then, you know, saying Powerade will make people ignore the fact that there's modified food starch in this that they might not like on its own. So the reason I'm bringing this up here is identity is important. It lets people identify the coalescing of traits that otherwise would not be describable. You help poor people, right? Sometimes, Jacob?
Yeah. Yes.
You help poor people. That's your religion. No, your religion is Christianity. It's the identity you have that also includes helping poor people and a bunch of other constituents, a bunch of other things that include things like, you know, not being cruel to foreigners, not like lusting after other women, not after like other than your wife, not creating graven images and golden idols and things like that Trump wants to be in Gaza. The general thing here that I'm trying to bring up is that if you leave out the actual label of an identity and try to restrict people in their expression of their identity, you are not, in fact, erasing them as people, and you don't erase the reality of what constitutes their identity. You just say you can't talk about that. And there's a reason for that. The reason for that is if people can consistently get people to stop talking about Powerade, there will be a point at which Powerade stops selling. There will be a point at which the culture of Powerade will stop existing. And you'll start to get maybe other flavored, you know, red electrolyte fluid, like, you know, Gatorade or whatever, Brondo, if you're Idiocracy. Like, whatever comes down line, you might get that later. It's got what plants crave. What can I say? I crave it as well. I am a plant. So the general gist of it is, if you have a problem with people expressing their identity, it is not because, and I'm not saying you do, I'm saying like the royal you. If you have a problem with somebody expressing their identity, it is not because you are literally arguing against the constituents of their identity. It's because you are trying to suppress their identity itself. Because if there's some right alongside their identity that you oppose, then you might be able to oppose that, and you might get some traction with people. You might even get some people who have that identity to agree with you. Like, I'm pretty sure everyone here hates Paula White and thinks that she is not representative of their faith, and Trump should not be making her the representative of their faith in the faith office he set up.
There shouldn't be a faith office in the first place, but
yes.
I mean...
Yeah, the faith office is bad to begin with, but it's bad precisely because it's going to attract people like Paula White, who is, checks notes, not a good person. So if I called you a Paula Whiteist because both of you claim to like the Bible, if I called you a Paula Whiteist because both of you, you know, like have crosses in various points in your house, you would say that I should get bent, and ideally with a hot poker. And like that would be a reasonable response, because Paula White sucks, and associating you with the worst elements of whatever sucks. This is the kind of collectivism that people do. And they do it because they want to eliminate the culture of Powerade, or in the case of here, they want to eliminate pride. And by the way, I wasn't planning on making this analogy. It just sort of came to me because I finished this one on an odd job I was doing. And so I was like, I could just do that. That makes sense. but like they want to eliminate your ability to express the label. If people stopped being able to profess the name of Christ, Christianity would evaporate. If people could not profess the name of Christ, if they were not willing to say, Lord, you are my Lord, I accept you as my personal savior, Christianity would die, and the world would become infinitely more satanic. If you cannot accept other people's labels existing, you are not apart from identity politics. You are engaged in it. And you are
Yes.
trying to use the politics of identity to ban an identity with which you disagree. And that is identity politics manifest. So when I saw a bunch of people at the start of things like the Mises Caucus and a bunch of these other groups trying to do that, I knew what they were doing, and I opposed that sort of culture, especially since a lot of the people alongside them were liars who had previously damaged myself and my associates, and previously caused significant problems for people of the Powerade identity. And so they basically had already proven themselves to be this sort of person, and I had already given them multiple chances to do better, and they hadn't. And those are the people that gradually drew people in to their no identity politics thing with Mises circles. Like, I have been opposing fascists in libertarian circles for over a decade now. When I started to recognize the problem with people like Liberty Hangout, when I started to recognize the problem with people like the Hoppian crowd, with the Pinochet like images being shared around where they were like, actually, he was a really good guy, with certain people of those persuasions gradually like starting to admit more and more how much they like Hitler or sympathize with certain ideas he has. I've been opposing this for over a decade, and both you and Hodey have seen me do this for a long time. And when I saw those same people getting traction in libertarian circles because they associated with the Mises Caucus, I was like, ooh, this isn't good. The Mises Caucus is not being very Misesian. They're not being very liberal. They don't like his liberalism that he had as the backbone of his mentalities. They're trying to bar illegal immigrants because they don't understand his books. They're trying to erase minorities because they don't understand competition. They're trying to destroy what they cannot convert by an actual competitive process in the marketplace because they're weak and because they are active participants in identity politics, not like the erasure of it. That sort of thing is the reason that I've opposed the Mises Caucus so much as I have. I took a more neutral stance earlier on because admittedly, the Mises Caucus was one of the places that I could like the group on Facebook was one of the places I could share stuff. And I was mutuals with them on Twitter. And some of the things that I was posting were getting reposts from the Mises Caucus. And so I was like, maybe this might be different. Maybe I could have been wrong about my assumptions. And then I started to talk against Javier Milei, who is an authoritarian in every respect. Javier Milei is like had in his platform an AI facial recognition superstate, crushing protesters, damaging like the drug market, making it easier to lock up kids, so that and forcing them into like for-profit prison labor should they get locked up. And all of this stuff that he was doing, I was already having a problem with. And then he did his shock therapy. Naomi Klein wrote a good book about this. And when he did that, the shock doctrine, if anybody wants to read it, when he did that and the economy started to tank for a really long time, and when people were in poverty and getting thrown out of their houses and thrown off of all of these programs that they needed and forced out of retirement, even though they were old and broken and earned their sleep, these people were in pain. And I started to talk about the pain they were in and the fact that Malay supported a bunch of terrible policies, including the miracle of Chile, and a bunch of stuff, including Israel. And I started to talk about all of this stuff, and the Mises Caucus started to reject my posts one by one by one by one by one.
Yeah,
And then
well, it's funny.
eventually I made a video against Malay to sneak it in there. And I called it "What Joe Biden Did What to Our Economy?" And I included a faint image of the Argentinian flag behind an evil Joe Biden thumbnail. And I went into a spiel about how terrible Joe Biden has made everything. And then I said, but actually that's Malay. That stayed up for exactly a day until they banned me everywhere, blocked me everywhere, and silenced me on all available platforms because I criticized their guy. That's what we're dealing with.
Yeah, no, it's funny that you bring up the Malay stuff because I think it was roughly maybe less than a year ago, but at some point last year, and people can go back and find it. I hosted a debate between you and I guess he goes by Shellbanger. I forget it. I think his name's Scott. Lives up in New Hampshire, and we did a debate on Malay from a libertarian perspective. And at the end of that debate, I was siding more with Scott. And as time has gone on, I've drifted more towards maybe not fully agreeing with your criticisms, but appreciating them more because there does seem to be this weird. So there's like a few camps, right? Like there's people who will reject Trump but support Malay, which made no sense to me. And for a while, I was actually defending the Trump strategy, going like, well, it's not that much different from Malay, right? Like you got to crack a few eggs and not make the perfect the enemy of the good. And, you might just have to, there's an order of operations to this stuff. There's some people who don't see the that connection, right? I think you and I've always saw that connection, but I think I was using it to maybe come to kind of a polar opposite conclusion. And now, as I've become more aware of how bad the Trump strategy is working out, I look at what Malay is doing and kind of go, okay, the stuff Jeremiah was saying in that debate makes a lot more sense now. People should go back and watch that. I'll link that at the end of this, but back in the description, or people can just search for it. But this ties in. You brought up Israel, and this. I'm going to bring a couple things in here and then kick it over to Hodey. So, like, there's this problem where when we're talking about the ability to criticize identities or collectivism or just make criticisms and observations in general, right? And I'm okay with people saying like I identify with this group. And again, that can be for religious purposes, that can be for cultural purposes and whatnot. I'm even okay with them saying like, we as this group have been marginalized, and we feel like we need to advocate for our right to not be trampled on by the government on the basis of this identity.
Real quick, give me 30 seconds. 30 seconds real quick, just to say, if you disagree with this because you think it only applies to LGBT people, you have not read the Bible, you don't know about Christian persecution, and you don't know why Christians should oppose this sort of attitude against, collective bargaining, because you would be one of the people who said that Christian persecution isn't real, it's just the persecution of individuals, and that makes you wrong, part of the problem, and the enemy.
Right. No, the state can absolutely persecute. I mean, it's one thing. Like, I think there's like conservatives who'd be like, okay, there's disproportionate economic outcomes, and they're not necessarily the result of systemic racism. And I think sometimes those arguments have some merit, although I would say, well, maybe not current, but it could be the outgrowth of historic systemic racism at the very least. But not to say that like you can't deny that historically the state has engaged in systemic oppression of group identities. Like, it just be like completely ahistoric and afactual to ever make that claim. And I think
it still is. Like, I mean,
it's still
already.
I know. And what I want to get to is that there's this weird, like, Israel and Zionism is such a weird line in the sand, right? Like, because on one hand, you get a bunch of people who would say that like the Jewish people have been marginalized and suffered through horrible anti-Semitism throughout history, pogroms, the Holocaust, and yeah, absolutely, right? Like, and if there's any group that like you can almost have a little bit of sympathy for like why they have excesses to their current political apparatuses, I have sometimes a little bit of that for the Jewish people from a historical perspective. But at the end of the day, I think Zionism, I think we would all largely agree, has turned into identity politics for Jewish people, where it's not just saying, hey, please stop oppressing us. It's we have to have, special rights and privileges, including our own, essentially, ethnic majority state in the Middle East, and have to have unlimited funding and support and whatnot to keep that. And if you have any disagreement with that at all on any ground, anything we do, then that's anti-Semitic. You hate Jewish people, right? And then there's this weird irony where some people might nominally seem to be on our side criticizing Zionism, but they're almost criticizing it in irony because their only objection is that it's done for Jews, because it's like, when oh, what's his name? Crap, one Christian nationalist guy, and one of the popular ones, not Wolf, but crap, I'm forgetting his name. But I mean, insert almost any Christian nationalist here. I mean, it would work. They basically their hatred for Israel is that basically like, hey, you're doing our idea, but not for white people. Right? Like that's almost what it is. And so there's this weird insanity right now with the current culture war machine, both inside the liberty movement and just in general, where it feels like people are simultaneously saying we're against identity politics for these people, but it's amazing when we do it, right? And I just don't know, like that. It's just like, it's astounding that people can hold those contrary statements at the same time. And certainly there's been a rise of white identitarianism. Hodey, I know you've said before that like you used to be a self-described, you use this word to describe yourself, a bigot, and whatnot. I've never identified that way. I've never had you talk about this before on the show, but I don't know, like, do you have any perspectives, whether they're from experience or just observations of just this phenomenon where people are becoming increasingly sort of like caught up or enticed by the call to be identitarian? Do you think, like, I think to some extent there is a blowback element to this where like one side plays identity politics and it triggers the other one to play it, but it also feels like, I don't know, like, and I'm the libertarian who's always talking about blowback, but I also think like at some point there has to be some personal agency in the equation here. Like, I've been called a Nazi and a racist and a white supremacist and all that, for years, right? You've witnessed that. You've had people, Hodey, say, how could you be friends with Jacob Leningrad? He is a, avowed Nazi white supremacist, all the stuff. And you're like, okay, well, he's not, like, I disagree with him strongly on X, Y, and Z, but he's not these things. So like there's I forget where I was going with that. Like there's people who are getting caught up and enticed in this identity politics game because they say like, well, I just got tired of being called a racist and a Nazi and all that. I was like, I guess I don't know. I simultaneously see something to that, but also feel like that doesn't let people off the hook. Do you know what I mean? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, we're opening a lot of boxes here. I'll try to address each one as much as I can. There is an element to, we associate the bad behavior with the other side with all of those people. Almost all of us collectivize this way, right? Like, they're from the Fakertarians-ish crowd. They're from the Mises Caucus-esque crowd. We don't want to talk about people as individuals. Even in the liberty movement, we fail to do this, despite us supposedly being individualists, right? We fail this all the time. And we collectivize, let's be honest, we even do it in ways when that benefits us. We collectivize Democrats and Republicans with their candidates. We're like, ha, this is it. You guys are idiots. Look how stupid you are. Look how dumb this guy is. Look at these bad things that this guy is doing, right? And you voted for this. You supported this, rubbing their faces in it. That's not working, but it's something that we do, right? Like, we know, it's funny that psychologically we've made so many advances as far as persuading people, and those are accessible. We all know we could engage in them, but we still have that gut instinct, right, to still like kind of play identity politics. That's why the man's fallen nature, right, is so tough. The Bible appeals to our nature very rarely, right, because a lot of our nature is kind of that negative, bad stuff. Listen, bad behavior has its own consequences. God says, vengeance is mine. You don't have to punish somebody for bad behavior. I got it. When somebody's dishonest, nobody wants to do business with them. I don't need you to tie dishonesty to Black people, white people, whatever. Dishonesty is something else, right? Anybody can pick that up. Now, there are elements when you look around various people, and something that we see in all of our circles is will be like, Jeremy Coppin, hey, there's not going to be very many Black people in the liberty movement. We need to get comfortable with that, right? Because they're not capable of understanding. Hoppe, gay people, they can't have kids. They're not going to be able to accept a libertarian society. Like, their time preference is too different. Got to get rid of them. That there's so much focus on this, like getting rid of these people because they're not going to understand. But we don't like it turned against us. Somebody would be like, oh, look at the domestic abuse rates among Black people. All right, look at mass shootings and pedophilia among white people, right? Like,
right.
There are, now here's the thing.
No, that doesn't count.
It's appropriate and fair to recognize, and I think that this is why we're walking a careful edge. It's important to understand when you are being held by your identity politics, right? When something has you gripped. At the same time, we shouldn't judge other people by that. So for example, there is exactly one group of people that Trump has not lost any support from since he took office. 74% of white evangelicals voted for Trump. 74% of white evangelicals are proud to say that they supported him today, and they're getting what they voted for. That is the only demographic that Trump hasn't lost anything with. Now, is it a white problem? Well, the thing is there are people that are playing with our identities. They're pulling us in that direction. It has nothing to do that because we're white. There's this excellent book called The Myth of Race, and it goes into detail historically about how, listen, the politicians, they know racism is stupid, right? They're not actually bigots themselves, but they're aware that they can mess with us like this, right? That they can hold on to these voting blocks. When we look at the Christian voting bloc and how the right wing has intentionally and carefully infiltrated this, and when you look at, what's that book? It's called like John Wayne or something, Christianity or something, about it analyzes the United States, that politicians have very intentionally gone in and we're like, we need to change this faith so that they will vote for us more, right? And so they've played with that identity to the point where we now worship Trump, even when he does explicitly non-Christian, anti-Christian things. It's no longer about being anti-war. It's no longer about being economic freedom. It's no longer about those things. We have this problem. Now, here's the thing. It is an individual problem, because I don't want to just gloss over the 26% of white evangelicals that are like, no way, right? Like that, the percentage of Black people that are vote blue no matter who. Listen, there's a reason they did that, right? Black people for the longest time was like, you can either vote for this party who pretends to like you or this party that objectively hates you. But as things have gone on, it's not that Black people are inherently democratic, right? It's not like their brains are just hardwired towards this type of politics. Politics is a foreign entity, right? It's just that people are grasping on to their identities. And here's the real tragedy and loss in all this stuff, because I think we need to examine not just that this is a problem, which I think we all know that it is, but that there is a real effect of this problem besides just like, oh, he's just telling a few jokes, right? We dismiss a lot of Jeremy Coppin as like, oh, that's just some clown in New Hampshire being a clown. Or we dismiss like Toad as some like, oh, yeah, this guy who self-described incel with a few thousand followers. Oh no, right? Oh no, we got on Fox News with his bad behavior. Oh no, right? Like it seems like a small deal. But we are losing out on something truly beautiful. I love this other book. I'm recommending two books in one monologue here. But there's this book called The Fall of Civilization. If you aren't in the mood for a book, you can listen to the podcast. It's very good as well. And one of the one of the thing is, there's not really, he's an anthropologist, right? It's not a philosophical thing. He's not there to condemn, certain behaviors or anything like that. But societies reach their apex when they're multicultural, and they reach their downfall when they attempt to be monocultural again, right? Why is that? Why is it that all these cultures are so good? Is it because like everybody's right? Well, no, of course. Lying's bad behavior, right? Stealing is bad behavior. But being a Jew from the Middle East and doing business in a European country is fine. There's nothing wrong with that, right?
And if it wasn't Jesus, it'd be illegal.
Right. Jesus would have some problems as well. Right. So there's this great quote that this guy's going, he goes to Rome, and he's like, man, the people here, I'm so sickened by it. They let these mongrel Jews in here. They let these Huns in here. We've got Mongols that are doing, oh, it's disgusting. I'm sickened by the Muslims. I'm sickened by all these kind of course, at that age, like a problem with any different type of Christianity, right? Like all these disgusting people. And at the end of his monologue, he's like, but I have traveled the world, and Rome is the greatest city on earth right now. They have the most prosperity. They give us the most things. I have all these nice luxuries. I wonder why that is. And he just like, they can't put it together that like all of us being different, but still unified is a beautiful, wonderful thing. And it's this kind of almost Tower of Babel situation where they want to knock it over because they know that if they don't invent race and make us believe it, like, I mean, there's a third book here, The Guarded Gate, right? If they don't invent a bunch of stuff against immigrants, that this nation is going to get better. But if we let it get better, their power wanes, because what's better for us is not better for politicians. Yeah. It's liberating. That ruins the stranglehold they have on us, right? Anytime there's all these progressions that these cultures tend to make. And listen, I get what Hoppe says on paper, that there is an idea that, Jacob, you and I will fight less if we believe all the exact same things. And it's probably true. We will fight less. Divorces are full of couples who never fight. They're full of people who just, we got along, and now nothing, right? Nothing came of it. And yet there are great marriages where they say, our contentions, our compromises are actually the thing that make us great. That being able to resolve these differences makes things beautiful. When Jesus is sending out missionaries, he's not sending them to Christian, Jew-friendly places. All of them get martyred, for goodness sake, right? He's sending them to these places that are hostile, but he expects that we behave in such a way that even if they kill us, our message only gets stronger. And this is really the beauty of it, that Christianity should transcend all of this identity, right? We're all one in Jesus. If it's a sin, God will work it out. And this kind of is why I have such an issue with the anti-gay stuff, because if it's a sin, then we do need to treat it as a sin, right? Lying has consequences. Thieving has consequences. Murder has consequences. We need to be able to understand the consequences of those actions. And so we need to be able to love these people and accept them as our neighbors without falsely saying, oh, you're from the Middle East? No, you're gross, right? Because that's not it. There are things that make us gross. That's an type of identity politics I will play, right? That there is, we are all one in Jesus Christ, but he says, there's not Jew or Gentile, there's not man or woman, because none of those are sins, right? That's not a big deal. But he doesn't say, hey, there's murderers and people that serve the homeless, and they're all the same to Jesus, right? Like when we are talking about our kingdom, we need to unite with all the people that are there to do good, that we unite to do well. And that is a libertarian society that is really beautiful. It's actually, strangely, we're on the precipice of it, especially as technology and information has unleashed so much. And it's really just the politicians standing in our way, politicians and cops that don't want that to happen. And these identity politics they play to keep us divided and keep us fighting over this, when we really should be liberated from it.
Yeah. I think that, so like there was this person on Twitter who had a question or comment about how like he said like, well, the issue is that we're focused on man-made identities rather than identities that are like from God, which I don't know exactly how, like I could be butchering the memory how he meant it or what, but there's something there that, at least like the way I took it, and I've been studying, I kind of go through like cycles of like different things I study. I had been on an eschatology kick for a while. I'm going back and going deeper into church history. Like I did like a gradual overview history study before. Now I'm kind of going more granular. Like I'm listening to like a book they use in seminaries. It goes like, century by century, very methodically. And there's this, interesting thing about the church, right? That the early church became a thorn in the side of Rome because like at first it was viewed as this like, sect of Judaism, right? And Judaism had this special privilege in the Roman Empire where like, because most cultures that got conquered were polytheistic and they didn't really have a problem making sacrifices to Rome's gods or making sacrifices to Caesar. Well, the Jews wouldn't do that, right? And the Romans, like as much as they were kind of evil and barbaric, they would often kind of like connivingly know, like, well, we can sometimes give people a little bit of, privileged liberty, right? If it means we can control them better, right? So their idea was like, fine, we'll make an exception for the Jews because, like, we don't really want to fight them. They're a kind of, hard to control people, but at least they're not spreading their ideas around, right? They're kind of like not a proselytizing religion or anything like that. So we're not going to get a huge problem. Well, then, enter Christianity, and it is a proselytizing religion, and it goes across culture, across race, across all these different backgrounds, which was such a, a focus of Jesus' ministry, right? Like how many of his parables are about how the kingdom of God is, upside down of these sort of like man-made fleshly expectations. The first shall be last, the last shall be first, the good Samaritan, so many, teachings and parables that are, very counterculture, right? To a lot of the, even today, they're timeless that way. And then with the early church, they become a thorn in the side of the Roman Empire because people are getting drawn into this religion that says we will not pay tribute to Caesar, right? And they're even more insistent upon it in some ways than the Jews are, to the point where, like, you mentioned, Christian martyrs and stuff. I mean, like, there are so many, when you're studying church history, there are, beyond just the apostles and the church fathers, there are so many individual accounts of just like people who got saved and just were so radically devoted to Christ that their allegiance was so bought by Christ's blood that they would rather die than give an inch to Rome. They give an inch to Caesar, right? Because their ultimate identity, their ultimate allegiance was to Christ before any of those other things. And there's something about that that's especially, I mean, it speaks a lot to me and what my project here is, but I think it speaks to what we're talking about here in terms of these identities. And now I don't think, and we can land on this part of the conversation and switch to talking more about some of our disagreements. And I have a way I'm going to segue it, because I don't think that, ironically, there's this quote that Stephen Wolfe uses, which I agree, but I disagree with his implication, where he says, grace doesn't destroy nature. No, I agree. Like, so we quote that Galatians 3 passage, there is no Jew, no Greek, no male, no female. I agree with that because our ultimate identities and allegiances in Christ. I don't think that means that male and female cease to exist any more than Jew and Gentile cease to exist, right? It should just mean that we're going to lay down all of our allegiances and identities in this world to submit to a higher authority, a higher identity, one that transcends those other ones, but doesn't change like the underlying physical, biological realities. That truth, I think, is especially damning to all identitarians, to all who want to play statist games and identity politics. And I think we would probably, that is, I think, where all of us would agree. And so this next bit is going to be, I guess, then where we'll get into some of the, hopefully civil disagreement. My pushback, so I guess there's two, Hodey, I had you on last year and we kind of went through a bunch of different scripture passages and, kind of showcased different ways of exegeting these scriptures to come away to different conclusions about if homosexuality is sinful according to the Bible, according to the Christian worldview. And we disagree on that. We're still friends regardless of that. Beyond just the scriptural interpretation, I think that I have an allergy to the way that the LGBT side of I guess this conversation approaches this, because they do seem in my opinion, to at times very much be saying that their ultimate identity is ultimately their sexual orientation. And that's how they identify, to the point where they say that, like, the only way that they would even accept Christ, that they would even come to believe in Christianity, is if their identity was affirmed. And there's something about that I think is fundamentally wrong in my view, because I don't think that, if you're going to follow Christ, you should be able to lay down your entire life. Jesus even says, like, radical stuff, which I think is a bit hyperbole, but like, if you don't hate your father or your spouse, right, then you can't love me, right? And I think that I see a lot of people who say, like, they were pushed out by the church because of homophobia, transphobia, and to be fair, even though I think homosexuality is sinful, there is also homophobia where you treat, like, there's this opposite correlate. Like, I'm saying, don't make identity your core feature. Now, a lot of right-wing bigots do this inadvertently, right? They go, oh, well, you're gay. Well, now you're different, right? You're fundamentally gay. And so my call to love you, even though I think you're sinning, goes out the window, and I'm just going to collectivize you. I'm going to advocate you have no rights. I'm going to advocate violence against you even. And I reject that wholesale. But I do think that at the end of the day, that if you feel the call to Christ, that means that all your identities, all your desires, all of that should be subordinate to that, to Christ. And you shouldn't have, I think there's like an idolatry almost of sorts that comes into this. In the same way, I think this happens with other identities. I think that for, whiteness has become an idol, right? European American heritage becomes an idol, right? Even
MAGA.
I think I think Judaism, the Jewish culture, becomes an idol for Jews, unfortunately. So it's not that I'm singling out the LGBT community here. I think, at the end of the day, a lot of our sins are rooted in idolatry, and this is just one expression of that common sin. But that is for me a bit of a crossroads here. So anyway, that's my thoughts. I don't know. Either one of you jump in as you feel led. You can push back or give your own point of view as far as that goes.
Dave Smith has this saying that he got a little blowback for, but he, and I disagree with why he said it, but he said, if I thought libertarianism, said this bad thing, then I just wouldn't be a libertarian anymore, right? If I thought Christianity was bigoted, I just wouldn't be a Christian. It's that simple. So I don't blame them for saying, yeah, I'm not going to believe in a God that says, like, you're evil for loving who you love, right? That that this, because there are certain bits.
Well, hold on. What if you just to be clear, you would say if someone says I love children, you wouldn't be down with that? Like in that,
yeah. So this gets into the aspect of fruit, right? By their fruit ye shall know us, right? And that a good tree can't produce bad fruit. Bad tree can't produce good fruit. Jesus, when mentioning that the Antichrist is going to come from the Christian church, that's like, hey, listen, I understand you're worried. So here's how you're going to know. Measure the fruit. Now, fruit is singular. Why? Because it's talking about the fruit of the Spirit. And so when we're talking about these individuals, here's the 9 things to keep in mind: love, peace, faithfulness, joy, goodness, gentleness, patience, self-control, and kindness. So when somebody, let's take both sides of the activism spectrum. We had a trans person throw a bag of poop at Riley Gaines the other day. Does that strike you as fulfilling those 9 core things that we ask, right? Love, peace, faithfulness, joy, goodness, gentleness, patience, self-control, kindness? Of course not. Now let's look at Matt Walsh, right? Of course not. None of those things. He will even tell you himself he's not joyful. He's angry. And why shouldn't he be angry all the time, right?
Right.
So he's exhibiting the hallmarks.
And just to make clear to the audience, like, and for those of the audio listeners, I agree with a lot of what Hodey's saying here. I've even done episodes critiquing Matt Walsh, even though I agree with, like, maybe his certain conclusions about what the Bible teaches. But again, this is what I'm talking about, that, like, even though I'm on that side of that issue, there are many who are on my side of that issue who definitely do not express the fruits of the spirit, or so they're bearing bad fruit 100% when it comes to this. So I would agree with you as far as that goes.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. And I mean, it's one of the reasons we can still be friends about this is because you don't treat being gay as the sin that he does. You treat it as lesser. You treat it as you don't see First Romans gay. You know what I mean? When people quote First Romans, and they're just, or, Romans chapter 1 and saying like, yeah, these people are full of every kind of evil and murder and spite and malice or whatever, right? Like, and here's kind of the issue that I have is, can a gay couple, are they capable of having those 9 things that compose the fruit, right? Hoppe would say no. They can't have kids, therefore they're incapable of, self-control that would be required, right? In which case that would also make somebody who is sterile incapable of the same thing, right? And so this is Hume's guillotine, right? That even if there's a link, if it's not total, then we can't blame the gay, right? Hume's guillotine. This is really important, we don't want to commit any fallacies here when we're talking about this. So we have to be absolutely 100% sure if we condemn homosexuality that it will produce bad fruit for every single person who engages in it. Right? That they won't have love, peace, joy, faithfulness, goodness, gentleness, patience, kindness, none of that, right? That they will fail that. So if they don't, if I can find a gay couple that does produce good fruit, what's the explanation here? Now, I could say this: Jacob is lying bad. Simple, right? Is it bad? Go ahead and answer.
It's actually complicated. I mean, do you lie to the SS officer who knocks on your door and
that's what I'm going with?
Jews in your basement.
Correct, right? So, in general, is being gay bad for most of us? I can tell you that I would be committing a heinous sin if I was gay. I would be committing a very atrocious thing in God's eyes if I were gay. If I were not, if I actually were, if I'm straight and try to be gay, it's a sin. But if I am gay, there's a reason why so many of these people who pray, and they're just like, God, I just take this gay away, take it away, take it away. Knock and it shall be opened, right? If you're asking for something righteous, God's going to snap that up and make you not gay anymore. That's the promise that we have in the scriptures. But he doesn't do it. Why isn't he doing that for some of these people? Why is it that for some of these people, he's like, no, I've given you this loving companion, and they engage in these loving relationships? Why is it that they can raise these kids who are full of these love, peace, gentleness, self-control, fruit of the spirit? Listen, I'm not going to defend all the LGBTQ people, just like you're not going to defend all the anti-LGBTQ people. It's impossible. There are bad people on both sides. But when God tells you murder is bad, but then God specifically tells you, Jacob, I need to murder your son as a sacrifice to me, Abraham, will you do it? Yeah, I will. All right, because there's a different request there, right? When we play Dungeons and Dragons, right, the specific overrides the general. So if you go before God and you're just like, listen, I've got all these verses here, and I don't believe Hodey, I believe Jacob, I believe that it does say all these things, but I am not full of malice. I am not full of lust. I'm not full of murder. I am patient. I am just lonely. And I just have this longing in my heart to have a companion here, like you gave somebody else, and you pursue that path. Are you functional in a libertarian society, or is this a violence against humanity that will result in our downfall, right? It's important to identify, is this the Jew-Gentile thing where it doesn't matter? Or is this I'm a murderer thing and I'm not going to get along with my neighbors as a result? And ultimately, I think this is why it's so critical that we recognize this. Jesus told us very specifically, there are truths that you can't bear right now. You can't even think about it, right? That's why I'm okay with saying, listen, even if I thought the Bible teaches us to kill an entire community, take the virgins and marry them off to another, tribe to keep them alive, or cripple all the animals so that they can't move around anymore as a ways of seizing somebody's land, right? Right next to the anti-gay verse we talked about, just a few verses before it. Don't mix fabrics. Don't want to be doing any of that, right? But we toss those out. Why do we toss those out? Right? Why are we no longer committing genocide anymore? Jesus says, hey, law of Moses, all that about the circumcision. We actually just read this in John the other day. Jesus is like, yeah, you guys were practicing in that well before God told you to do it. You made that a God institution, but it was not in its origin. You said it was because you wanted to continue the practice, right? And this is the issue. What are we identifying here with Christ? We have these mistakes because human beings are fallible. God, however, the Word of God, who is Jesus Christ, by the way, not the Bible, the Word of God is Jesus Christ. What does he tell you when we pray about this, when we think about this? I'm going to end by this just because I think I've gone on long enough, and I'm sure Jeremiah has a lot to say. But let's talk about this in practice. How about the person who actually put together the strategy for Christians, Richard B. Hayes, who said, let's let homosexuals in, let them be part of our church, but just kindly remind them that they're sinning. Let's not treat it like murder, but let's also not treat it like it's okay. Let's go with this halfway place. He, leading New Testament scholar on the planet, by the way, he just passed away. But if you've taken a theology course, you've read 4 of his books. Even a non-Christian theology course, you've read 4 of his books, and probably more if you've done any amount of work by this guy. The leading New Testament scholar, at least he was, on planet Earth. And he just wrote a book last year called The Widening of God's Mercy, and was like, here's the thing. I believed what I was right, but the fruit didn't bear it out. Ultimately, these institutions I created fell into MAGA, Trump, anti-gay, whatever. And ultimately, the ones that survived, the ones that produced the most fruit, were the ones that were like, I don't think you're a sinner. I think God loves you. I think God made you this way, right? When God appeals to our sexuality in Romans, appeals to our nature, right? That we're doing unnatural things, we go against the homosexuality. It's notable because God doesn't appeal to our nature so many times. We talked about this before. Lying's in our nature, cheating's in our nature, thieving's in our nature. These are all bad things that, we're supposed to overcome. But that is something we're not. That's not a challenge there. And so I totally understand why gay people are like, yeah, I'm not gonna pretend I'm somebody else, right? Like, why would you do that and be a part of a faith when you know it's a lie? I wouldn't believe in libertarianism if I believe libertarianism meant being crappy to immigrants. I wouldn't believe in Jesus if Jesus was like, go ahead and be crappy to immigrants. What made Jesus Jesus is that he preached these awesome, wonderful things. And there's still so much more to learn, as he says. So when I get in touch with the Holy Spirit, when I examine the world around me, this is what I see. Not 100% of the time, but treating individuals as individuals. Some people are okay in gay relationships and they produce good fruit. And I want them to have a place in this world. And my worldview is unfortunately completely incompatible with bigotry. Even if we feel that bigotry is justified, even if we think God said so, the Bible says so, libertarianism said so, Hoppe said so, whatever, I don't care. It doesn't bear out. And that tree needs to produce good fruit. Otherwise, it's a bad tree, as the Bible says. Jeremiah, you may introduce your thoughts on this.
So, there's a variety of things, and I'm gonna look something up, because there's a point to be made here. If you want to talk about like manifest things, if you want to talk about how things are as how they've been presented to us physically, nobody is going to say this is not a bottle, right? Nobody is going to say that because it's manifestly a bottle. And if they do say it's not a bottle, we can all disagree with them because it presents all of the qualities of a bottle. And like the real thing to look into is like there are variations of sexes. It's not just like sexes and sexualities. Even on a chromosomal level, it is not just a binary. It's what's known in circles as a bimodal distribution. God made that bimodal distribution. God made a ton of different variations of sexes and chromosomes. There's a paper that I can include in the a study sort of that I can include in a link to Jacob for inclusion in the description should he so choose, that includes a ton of different variations that present themselves in nature. Now, it's the same sort of thing as what?
Are you talking like in humans? You talking about like intersex, like the different,
and various things like that, like, and even just one other even just one that isn't just the two, proves it's not a binary. It is like two general extremes of presentation, two general norms, right? When I say bimodal, the mode is sort of an average in mathematics, statistics, that sort of thing. So your mode is XX and XY, right? And those will comprise like the vast majority of sexual representation, right? And that's why those are what's taught in basic biology. But when you get into advanced biology, you get all of the others, and there's a lot of them. You've got intersex, you've got Klinefelter, you've got so many things that exist as a separation of presentation. And in general, generally speaking, I don't think you're going to say Satan made those. If God made those, he made them for a reason, and it's not to be abominations. Aren't all humans created in the image of God? So if that's the case, and all humans are created in the image of God, then it's not even as simple as saying male and female. Even if you look into it, like there's some quibbles over what Genesis even meant, and whether or not the original translation talked about Eve being made of Adam's rib, or whether it was actually the entire side of Adam. And that's that would place women as relatively equal to men in terms of stature and capabilities. And if you wanted to present a sort of more male-dominated society, you might tell a different story to make it seem like, well, women are just a rib. Women are so insignificant compared to the man. So you might want a different translation that, makes it seem more like your side and less like the original translation that didn't say rib. It didn't say the bone of rib. It had specific words for that. And so the reason I'm bringing all of this up is because there are certain people who want to silence effectively the trans position, the intersex position, anything that is beyond maybe the LGB. And oftentimes in many Christian circles and in many non-Christian fascist circles, Nazis especially, who persecuted Christians on their own, which is why it's hilarious whenever an alleged Christian tries to team up with the Nazis, because it's like, yo, those weren't on your team, and they made that clear. But
It's
the
fox and the scorpion.
Yeah, exactly. And frog, yeah, but the
Frog and
general
scorpion,
point,
yeah.
the general gist is if you start to look at all of these little nuances, and if you take a stark look at that, and from a Christian perspective say, God made that. God made those people that way. Then you immediately invalidate the arguments of a ton of bigots who want to say that those are freaks, that those are people who should not be, allowed into normal society, that Michael Knowles says we should eradicate from public existence. And then you get into gender variation, the actual psychology that presents from different things. And this is something that has existed in so many historical societies on an anthropological level. And then you get into gay and bi and asexual. Technically I qualify as ace. I'm technically on the LGBT plus LMNOP spectrum, because I qualify as what's called gray ace, because I'm only into a chick if I've had a really long, intellectually stimulating conversation with her. I want to get to know her. I want to understand her. Ironically, it's a very Christian perspective, but from the perspective of raw sexuality, not immediately seeing any woman and being like, boing, I wanna, is abnormal, because you're supposed to immediately see that and be aroused. The Bible talks about suppressing those urges, but there are certain ones among us who have limited urges. J.K. Rowling even takes digs at those people and says, oh, they just made up asexuals. Those are people who just don't fancy a shag. Anything that these people can do to silence the opposition, they do. They try to take off the label. They try to minimize what they can in order to say that anybody who identifies with these groups is identifying with something that doesn't even exist or shouldn't be allowed to say what it is. Like they need to they need to live normal, quiet lives. Probably not. Probably they deserve to be just as loud as everybody else is. Probably the people who historically have aligned against them and tried to say that their rights arguments don't hold up are the same sorts of people who would want to suppress those rights, and who have a whole lot of arguments that they make in favor of why those people should live less enriched, less affirmed lives than the other people. And those people align with tyrants. They don't align with Jesus, who would not say that. He would not say, hey, go talk to your master in government and get them to pass a law that says you can't identify as like something that you firmly believe you are. Jesus would, in the most conservative estimation, where Jesus disagrees with everything I just said, he would still say, it's not your walk, it's not your life, leave them alone. If they want to come to me, they will come to me. You should live your life in a way that they would want to live your life instead of trying to run theirs from the pulpit of government control. And in general, the people who want to control them are trying to like do so by way of eliminating their label so they can no longer group up, and trying to make lists of them, collect their addresses, say that they can't identify a certain way, or they'll be, kicked out of their military position, or they'll be denied certain government benefits.
No, I agree.
Or
I mean, this has
like
historically been done to Christians too, which is the
Yeah.
irony of like it always shows how historically illiterate people are when they give this kind of power to the state, because it's just like, really, like how much church history have you studied?
First they came for the trans people. And also, actually, they're coming, ironically, and I have to say this because it's absolutely ridiculous, they're coming for the furries. There's an act in Texas where they're trying to say that because of the lie that litter boxes are in school bathrooms, that you can, and this is part of the woke agenda, that litter boxes are in school bathrooms and they're letting kids identify as animals. And this is the woke identity gone too far, and it's corrupting our youth, and we need a bill to ban this in schools. But when they asked demanded the politicians pushing this bill find an example of any of this happening, not only could Ken Paxton not do it because it's not happening, but neither could the representative actually like authoring and pushing the bill, because these people are liars. These people have to invent shit, and like if they don't invent shit, it's because they're citing the worst possible examples of what the other side could do, instead of being at all charitable, instead of giving the same charity to the other people that they would demand. They refuse to give that charity. They refuse to give that quarter. They refuse to be reciprocal. They refuse to be consistent. That is anti-Christian. Christ would not say that there are different standards for different people. He has the same commandments for us all, does he not? And if not, then what is the Bible for? And so if that's the case, if Christ has the same commandments for all of us, and if the commandment to be consistent and to be honest and to not judge in a way that you would not want to be judged is something that people are going to hold up in one moment for their own purposes, then it's a magnifying glass on themselves when they refuse to remove the beam from their own eye before inspecting the speck in their brother's, and when they refuse to follow the basic rules of Matthew, which is an excellent book if you want to piss off 99% of Christians. Like, if they don't want to follow their own instructions, understand God made these people this way, understand this is what reality is, understand this is how Christ made these people, and if they don't at all accept that, at least that they should have consistent treatment of those people and not expect better treatment for themselves, they're not being Christian. They're being fascist and using an Christian political strategy that has historically gone directly against Christianity in the name of their God. And if you ask me, there's little more that could be satanic than that.
No, so there's the delineation you gave there. Yeah, I mean, the second half, in terms of at the very least, you know, as I've I think said a lot of times in the show, like the same rights that protect my ability to live my life and hold my beliefs and convictions, like I have to fight for those for the people I disagree with. If not, like, then just like, you know what, and it's even fine if you don't believe that, but then just at least be honest, you're not playing the game of liberty. Like, we're not we're not playing the same game at that point. We're just not. You believe in something else, or you at the very least you believe in liberty for me and not for thee, which is not really liberty. In terms of the other stuff, I mean, I'll briefly respond, but I don't want this to be a debate, but just to kind of give the opposite perspective here, going in order of what they were brought up. I mean, so Jeremiah, you brought up the, are these things abominations or evil that God created? And this has to be said with some care, because what I'm trying not to say is something that's dehumanizing. And it's not my intent. But I would say that a lot of these things, like intersex and even disordered sexual orientations, I think are the result of sin, and not that God made people a certain way. In the same way that, like, I don't think someone born blind or someone born deaf or someone born with, like, I mean, there's a million different genetic variations, some of which, have little to no little effect on people, but some of which have, pretty noticeable effects, that they're not the way that human beings are typically made to operate. It doesn't devalue them as a person, but that doesn't mean that God created them that way, or that that's God's design. And when it comes to the intersex stuff, I mean, these people are, I think there's some exception to this, but I think a lot of people who are intersex uh, are infertile and not able to reproduce, or can't reproduce without a lot of intervention. So it does seem to me that, you said like bimodal. I was like, I think it's kind of hard to look into the biology of it and be like, I think it is fair to say the biological design is XX and XY, because that's what leads to normative reproduction. When you have variations of that, they're still people, they're still human beings. They aren't like something else. They have, like I guess there's like a stigma when you say that they have a genetic, defect, but that's the way I would view it, a genetic defect. I actually don't think, for intersex people, I think they're the people of which, like, they're actually, like, there's a lot of complicated intersex manifestations. And I think that for those people, there actually is a fair argument to be like, listen, like,
Let me just,
we'll go, if you want to say something quick, that's fine.
like, we're all white. That was not how humans were originally. Humans, even from a Christian perspective, descended from much darker skin tones elsewhere. The Bible does not describe the original humans as white. It does not describe the original humans as either, we've got all the variations here. We got, like, a short but fine-haired person. We've got a long-haired person. We've got bald. I mean, the Bible does describe some.
No, I see, and just for sake of time, I see where you're going, but I would just say that, like, with a lot of things that get varied over time, there's no correlate drop off in, like, reproduce. Like, so, like, a black person can reproduce with a white person, much to the chagrin of many Christian nationalists, right? So, like, so that's not, like, it's not a flaw that over time people have developed different melanin levels in their skin, right?
And plenty of intersex people have reproduced. Plenty of intersex people have gone on to have spawn. Plenty of intersex people.
Yeah, I mean, there's different,
and also
there's different types, but I think some of the the ones where they can typically reproduce, I think, are the ones where they typically are more like they're like, yeah, this is different, but it's functionally XX or XY. Then there's ones that are truly like, this is, when you get away from, but put it this way, the intersex conditions where they no longer neatly present as male or female are typically the ones where fertility is a very big question mark.
But
That's my understanding of the science.
Here's the thing. If you call them a defect without acknowledging the broad range of other variations that have historically been adapted for one environment or one circumstance, and then later on been heralded later on down the line because they made sense for that, but don't make sense for other environments. Being born white in Africa, like in Saharan Africa, Middle East, that sort of thing, would be very difficult to manage. Being born white in the Alps or in Switzerland or Norway is different, because up there you've got like less sunlight, who's going to bake you less and give you less what for cancer there. So the general deal is that there are certain things that are suited for different things, and that's how those variations meet themselves out. Now, you can say that because they exceed the norm, right? That they aren't exactly things that will pass down in large quantities later on down the line, at least not nearly as large as the norms of the primary two, the XX and XY. But the fact that they can, and the fact that they have, and the fact that more like liberal modern society is more accepting and tolerant of people, that's what creates these people in the numbers that they are now. Because here's the thing. Previously, and this is something that plenty of LGBT people bring up because it's a totally valid thing to compare it to. Previously, if you were left-handed, you might have gotten burned at the stake. If you were left-handed, you might have been called a witch or a demon or something like that, and it's because of an interpretation of the Bible that talks about the left-hand path. And it's talking about how people on the left-hand path are of Satan. So you must write with your right hand. You must have right-hand dominance. If you don't have it as a kid, we must train the demons out of you. It's that
I'm ambidextrous, so that's a funny wrinkle in
that. And here's the thing. When they started to accept left-handed people, look at what the chart did. It went flat up-ish up until the point at which they started to accept them and stopped, killing them. And then it had this massive spike. Oh no, there's an epidemic. It's such a spike of left-handed people. Look, the Satanists are taking over. You can write with your left hand and throw a ball with the left hand. America's going. But then it plateaued because it's statistically normalized, and the amount of them that would exist in society normally got to be considered normal. And that's how things become norms. There is a plateau of certain races. There is a plateau of certain characteristics. There is a plateau of people with giant thick beard hair. There will be a plateau of these people as well when they're allowed to exist and not treated as or called defective. When they're allowed to exist and not be treated as somebody that God did not create the way he did. Because are you saying, and as a Christian, that God's work is defective?
I think that sin creates obvious defects and things that aren't part of the original design in all of natural creation, including death. Like death wasn't part of the natural creation. So that there's a lot there. And
what sin do Christian couples commit that causes their children to be this way?
Well, so there's I don't believe in like the sort of like generational sin that like you're I mean, other than there's a lot there. I mean, actions have consequences.
What sin did they commit in the womb then? If it's the result of sin and not God's creation,
sometimes it's just the general status of man's fallenness and just sin's effect on nature in the abstract, not that it's the direct response of someone's individual sin. Listen, there's a lot here, and just for the sake of time, I think on that particular thread, we might tie a bow in it. I will admit there's something to what you're saying that I'd be interested to explore more in a different time and setting.
Admittedly, like, just to be clear, admittedly, I'm a weird schizo like person, and I like the bipolarism means that the way I gather and present information is like, here's a conspiracy board of a bunch of facts, fact. So it's like I can understand. It's kind of like we can't talk about all of this now. I just wanted to put it out there.
No, that's fine. two other things I wanted to touch on very quickly, and then kind of give you guys both as quick as we can, closing thoughts, because we're over time here.
Go over time?
I know. I don't know why I need to start just budgeting 2 or 3 hours with you guys, but there's only so much time in the day. Yeah, gosh. 24-hour streams. So gosh, my mind's failing me here because it's getting so late. So one of the things was, I wanted to touch on the narrative of Genesis, right? And the woman coming, because like this is actually fundamental to my worldview, because I think the story is written that way for the opposite of what maybe you were suggesting, that like maybe, so like perhaps there were misogynists who have twisted this story from its original use, but I think the original and to this day intention of the woman being created from the rib of the man, and I'm not trying to be fundamentalist here and say it literally happened or whatnot. I'm kind of agnostic on that, not the point of this discussion, but just thematically, typologically, just talking about it here, okay? I think it's not to demean women. It's not even to say men are better. It's not talking about man or woman being better or first, whatever. It's rather that women and men complete each other because they come from one another. And that's the image of marriage, is becoming one flesh. And so on one hand, they're one, but they're one because they're two distinct halves of one. And that is why to me, the arguments about marriage being a man and a woman, and the ideas of man and woman being very different things in God's creation, has some to do with some of the passages that we've talked about in the past. But for me, it has a lot to do with just the imagery and typological, sort of like metaphysical substrate that God's baking in at the very beginning, and then reiterates, and even Jesus reiterates, saying that, man shall leave his father and mother to become, one with his wife. That this is the norm. And I guess just to tie a bow on it, then to talk to something that Hodey said about the bearing good fruits, like I don't think that's a good heuristic in the way you're using it, because there are a lot of sins that can seem to bear good fruit in a certain capacity, right? Like people who are sometimes very prideful and self-centered, that means they can get ahead in life, right? So they can like be very successful, right? So they can bear good fruit, right? Then there's things that are like, like things that aren't necessarily going to bear nothing but bad fruit, because God can redeem it. And like for example, my wife and I did not wait until marriage to have sexual relations, and I regret that, and she regrets that. But good fruit has come from our family in spite of not doing that, right? And not even just with each other, that like I had sex with a woman before I got together with her. So all that to say that like that those sins were bad, but it doesn't mean that like I was then damned forever to have bad fruit because of those sins. Good fruit can prevail sometimes anyway. I don't think it's just like this like 1-to-1 ratio where like the minute now in the ultimate, eternal, and the final count of things, the wages of sin is death, and sin separates us from God. But there are like for there are people in church today or any day of the week or whatever who are blasting homosexuals and then watching pornography on their phones while they're married, right? So I wouldn't say that person is separated from God, but I'd say that they are, living in some unrepentant sin to some degree, and that is not for me to judge. That is between them and God. Other than like if I found out, I'd say, dude, you need to stop watching pornography. And as far as evaluating if a gay person or a gay couple can know God, that's the kind of comparison I'd make. I'd be like, well, I think what they're doing is sinful, but that doesn't mean that like that person, again, this is, I think, the bigotry of the other side here, is that they go, oh, if you watch pornography, God's grace can apply for that, right? If you lie, God's grace can apply for that, right? All sorts of things God's grace can apply for. You're not automatically cut off from God. But if you're gay, that's completely different. You're cut off from God. It's like I don't think that automatically follows. So I think it's possible that people can be wrong about this and think that they can be in a homosexual relationship or identify as homosexual, but still be pursuing God. And that, like, put it this way, we are as individuals made up of a lot of different complex actions and identities, relationships, and we're not one of those things is the grand sum of all we are. And so that is, I think, what explains a lot of this, and it kind of cuts both ways. It cuts against Hodey's argument, but it kind of cuts against, I think, the bigotry of the other side as well. But that's I guess the quickest I can do in terms of a explanation of why I'm not convinced by those arguments. I mean, I even think another parable I wanted to bring up, and this will be my last point, was the rich young ruler, right? Who, by all accounts, in that passage has good fruit, right? Like, he's not a bad person. He says he keeps the commands, right? That he loves his neighbor, doesn't murder, doesn't steal, all this. But then, he's like, teacher, I've kept your commands. Like, what more do I have to do? Jesus, like, one more thing. Go and sell all you have, give to the poor. If you have treasure in heaven, come and follow me. And then he doesn't do it. He walks away, right? So the bad fruit here is the things that separate us from Christ. And so I still do kind of find myself saying, like, and I kind of get what you're saying, Hodey, that, like, well, if Christianity says we have to be bigots, I wouldn't want to be a Christian. But I don't have time to unpack that, other than say I don't agree with that framing. I think it's not about being a bigot. I think it's just, as I said, I think my consistent thread through all of this, from all the topics we've talked about, is that none of even my relationship with my wife is subordinate to my relationship with Christ, right? Because there are people who are called to celibacy, people who are straight and called to celibacy and called not to be married, to deny the desires of their flesh, to have a family, to have kids, right? And they're told, no, like, you're to live your life for Christ. Or people who get married, and maybe it's right, but then they have a crisis because, your spouse can become, not ideally, but if your spouse falls into sin, right, or falls away from God, they can separate you from God. They can try to pull you away from God, and you have to desire Christ above all of that. And so that's, for me, what it comes down to, is that it's not that I can't recognize that there's a sacrifice for a gay person. If I'm saying to follow Christ, you can't have a romantic and sexual relationship. I think there's straight people who are called to that. And I think it's always hard, but there's a reason why, like, as much as we're talking about good fruit, Christ also says that following me leads to hardship, to not just persecution from this world, but that it's a harder path. It's a narrow path, right? Narrow is the path that leads to life. So there's a lot there. I'm sure we have not convinced none of us have convinced each other of our positions yet. Hopefully this showcases to the audience a couple things. One, that there is some complexity to a lot of these topics. And B, that in a libertarian society, this would be happening at a bar or a coffee house. And then we'd say, oh, I got to get home to, my partner, or go home at work tomorrow, and, hug it out, go home. And that's that, because no one's trying to weaponize the violence of the state against one another to say how they have to live their life. So, Jeremiah, try to give a 5-minute closing statement, and then Hodey, you get a 5-minute closing statement, and then we can get out of here.
Yeah. Well, so I'll just say this. There are and I'll start with this. There's an article that you can read from Scientific American, and it's called Sex Redefined: The Idea of Two Sexes is Overly Simplistic. There's another one that you can read that is from National Institutes of Health: Only Two Sex Form, but Multiple Gender Variants. And then there's other ones from people like Joshua Kennan talking about 6 most common biological sexes in humans. And the one talking about 6 most common really upsets a significant amount of people, because there's also more beyond that. But like the 6 most common element of it, they're like, 6 most common? 2 is the most common. I refuse to accept anything else. But there's XX, X with just one X. There's XXY, there's XY, there's XYY, and XXXY. Those are all, like, they're not all equally common, and certainly XX and XY is the most common. But you get more heritability, right, along certain lines. And those heritability lines pass on genes that might create other circumstances, like in the Scientific American article, where it's literally talking about how this 46-year-old pregnant woman found out that most of her body was actually scientifically male according to XXXY chromosomal variations as stated normally. So generally speaking, the reason I'm bringing up all of this is it's not simple. None of it is. And the more we find out that it's not simple, the more there's a certain type of reactionary regressive who's going to say we shouldn't look at any of this. We should just suppress the label, burn the books, like they did immediately in Nazi Germany with Hitler Youth raiding institutes of sexology and burning everything that would prove this, and did prove it. And, like, all of this sort of thing is designed to prevent thought. Christ did not want you to not think. He wanted you to rigorously and perilously and tumultuously test the spirits. He wanted you to fight and wrestle with powers and principalities. He wanted you to go up against the demons of this world and ask every single complex question you would need to in order to come to the right conclusion, not the conclusion that society, that the state, that the church, that anybody but him and the truth would agree with, because the truth shall set you free. If you're truly on the path of truth, asking questions is not going to interfere with that. If you're truly on the path of truth, tolerance will not stop you. If you're truly on the path of truth, then you will come to the right conclusions because the truth will help you. And the truth is that sex is more complicated than two. The truth is that gender is more complicated than sex. The truth is that race is a series of variations and that all of them are, like, created for a purpose. And those purposes are their positions in various climates, environments, biomes, and various places as well. That's the reason certain people are better in certain places than others, because of where they were from. And Jesus knew this because he was not well accepted in certain places because they could immediately tell that he came from someplace else. He was of a darker complexion. He was an illegal immigrant in various places. And the general gist of it is there is a sect of regressive, recalcitrant, stuck in their ways, stiff-necked, used wineskin, sort of fake Christian false prophet that would like you to believe everything is very simple and nothing should be asked. We should just go with what we had before, because back when it was simpler, there was less of this terrible, corrupting influence on the youth, and we were doing so much better without this gay race communism in our schools and corrupting our youth. And this is the same thing that happened with the Satanic Panic. This is the same thing that happened with the Red Scare. This is the same thing that happened with the race riots and the burning of Black Wall Street. This is the same thing that happened with Stonewall. This is the same thing that happened with the, like, lynchings of various minorities throughout American history, with the, burning of witches, the drowning, the whatever they needed to do to justify it. These are mistakes. These are not Christ-like. These are not what people should do if they want to turn the other cheek, be slow to anger, be quick to, forgive, not let the sun go down on their anger. Things like that Christ commanded that many Christians would rather not do, while they create movements and personal biases that are stoked by and filled with hatred for the other, for the different, for that which God made that is not like them. And that is not Christianity. It's not anarchy. It's not libertarian. And it's not what anybody should do. If you are trying to avoid identity politics, politicizing the attacks against an identity is not the way to do it. And if you truly are opposed to identity politics, as the Mises Caucus claimed to be, then learn from their examples and learn from their mistakes and never follow their path, because it leads to supporting Nazis. It leads to the Libertarian Party of Colorado posting memes about sending the black people back to Africa instead of enslaving them, because you don't know, the Jews don't know what they did by bringing them here. A lot of loaded conclusions and question begging, like, was that really the Jews? No, it wasn't. Not mostly. Was it really those people doing all of the crimes? Maybe, but it might be a product of their environment. And no, it wasn't, because the vast majority of people who commit basically all crimes aren't them. It's always this. It's always demonizing. It's like, that's why they've got to use this ugly caricature of a Jew, because if they were honest about what most Jews look like, it's not that. They have to use like lies. They have to deceive you. They have to trick your brain. And then they have to lie to you that this is what Christianity looks like, because Christianity is not deceitful. Christianity is honest, and it is based in the rock of the truth. And that's what will set you free, not bigotry.
Yeah, that was good. I think I agree with about everything you said there. So, Hodey, closing statements.
Yeah, 3 John chapter 1 verse 4 says, I have no greater joy than to hear that my children are walking in the truth. The truth is so important, because when you said what you were hoping, Jacob, is that we can prove that you and I can be like, oh, we agree to disagree, and sit down and I'm going to go to lunch afterwards. I'll catch you later, right? And just have fun. But in truth, that's not the way this works when we have these conversations. There's people that call for the physical expulsion of my friends. There are people who say that these races can't mix, that this monoculturalism must exist. I cited Rome earlier. One of the big downfalls of Rome was the attempt at monoculturalism. Now, the monoculturists love to cite the fact that, well, we had to remove the gays somehow. We should have never let them in to begin with, because that led to this huge destruction. Idiotic that a country would achieve, or that an empire would achieve, their maximum living standard while welcoming people. And that they would, as soon as they start hating on those people and trying to violently get rid of them, that they'd collapse and still manage to blame those people anyway. It's like blaming the capitalists today, right? Like, for all the faults of the economy, even though the capitalists lost to the Keynesians in the 1920s, right? Like, it's not fair for us to get blamed for something that is not our fault, right? And so likewise, I can't have a friendly conversation with here and being like, hey, we're sitting in the middle of Rome enjoying all these great multicultural foods and people, and have somebody be like, got to get rid of those Jews though, got to get rid of those blacks though, got to get rid of those gays though. When you misidentify a problem, that's a serious issue, right? When a doctor misidentifies it, they may be trying to treat your symptoms, sure, right? But I'm not going to express any gratitude if they treat the wrong thing. They're going to do a bad surgery.
Oops, I removed the wrong arm.
Right, exactly. But hey, I recognize that when right, Rome had problems, right? To be sure. I'm not hyping up like the Holy Roman Empire is some wonderful thing, right? In fact, wars and stuff. It's a great book, even if you're not like sold on what I'm talking about. It's a great book for teaching like how cruelty and war is like that's one of the things that comes back to bite a lot of these civilizations as well.
What book?
It's called The Fall of Civilizations. It's a podcast, but he condensed it into a book, and it's a good book if you just want like an overview of like the lots and lots of podcasts that he does. But I like that it's not just the downfall of empires; it's civilization specifically. We want people to experience love and goodness. Now, I noticed, Jacob, you had to redefine the fruit of the spirit to make that heuristic bad, right? So, for example, running for politics, oh, sure, they get money, sure, they get fame, sure, they get access, of course. Right? Jesus even mentions Christians will suck at politics. They're not going to get ahead in life. They're not going to be rich. They are going to be persecuted, right? So why is it? That's not the fruit of the spirit. That's what you call fruit, right? That's what politicians call fruit. That's what cops call fruit. That's what, unfortunately, some capitalists call fruit. Stuff, material wealth, right? What is it? What is the fruit of the spirit? Love, peace, faithfulness, joy, goodness, gentleness, patience, self-control, and kindness. Remember those things, right? When we talk about this, because now go back and think about this, because if it's right to cure the gays, if it is right, then the people who go through these programs and the people who run these programs will be full of love, peace, faithfulness, joy, goodness, gentleness, patience, self-control, and kindness. Everybody who cures the gays is going to be an awesome person, right? For engaging in this process. Maybe not everybody, but at least the ones who are genuine about it, right? When you engage in this process. I cited Richard Hayes earlier. He's a genuine guy. He genuinely thought he was doing the right thing by being like, let's treat it as a sin, but whatever, right? The thing is, he examined his fruits and he wasn't pulling up the fruit of the Spirit. He was pulling up something else, you know? So what we need to do is say, like, if the gays are wrong, or if Jesus was wrong for not getting married, maintaining his single XY and missing his other half, right? If all these, you know, all these other prophets that didn't get married, right, were committing these heinous sins by not getting married, right? Or people are committing heinous sins by getting married, as Paul seems to suggest, or something like that, right? That, like, hey, that will bear out. We will see it in the fruit, right? And so this is my challenge. We can agree to disagree all day, but we're not going to disagree about the results of these things. The reason Jacob and I can both disagree about Matt, or agree about Matt Walsh, is because he doesn't have the fruit of the Spirit. That's observable. If it's a bad heuristic, Jacob, Jesus shouldn't have given it to us, and definitely shouldn't have given it to us over and over and over again, to judge people by the fruits and what they produce, by that fruit of the Spirit, right? Because that's how we know it's good. I don't like being described as gay affirming or like trans affirming. The reason being is because I think that some people are just experiencing gender confusion, and I don't want to just automatically affirm. What I want is the Holy Spirit to affirm. I want the one who is perfect, who knows them better than anyone else in the world, to affirm what they are. But I'm also not going to spit in God's face when God says, yes, you're gay. I made you that way. It's okay. This is not because you sinned. It's not because your parents sinned. It's because I made you gay, and that's okay. God made Jesus to be a eunuch, right? Some people are born that way. As Jesus said, right? Like, called some people to be like me, be a eunuch. Some people no. Some people yes, some people no. We need to treat people as individuals. Judge them as individuals as opposed to collectives. And as soon as we fail to do that, we need to look at these gay camps, these gay conversion camps, and look at what we've done to these people and recognize that this is a tremendous evil that we've perpetrated because the fruit's not there. And we also need to look at somebody who does have the fruit, those gay couples that do have all those fruits that I talked about, right? Not me, Galatians, I guess, talked about, right? But this is what the scriptures teach. If it's a bad heuristic, Jesus shouldn't have given it. But I think it's a rather good one, because we do have wolves in sheep clothing. Jesus tells us that over and over. Look, don't pull the plank out of our own eyes, right? And I think when we see with that, when we pray to the Holy Spirit and get that affirmation, we're going to find that verse where Jesus promises those old apostles, listen, there's some truths you just can't bear right now. I don't know if they could have handled that, right? A lot of the Old Testament stuff. Oh, I let you divorce people for any reason because you couldn't handle it, right? You couldn't handle the truth. I think that we're in a place now where we can handle the truth. And if we pray about it with some of these people, if they actually are trans, if they're actually gay, and we get them to raise up, and I think the Love First Christians, I'll go ahead and end on this because it's a perfect place to pitch it. I have detransitioners. We have multiple actually of them in the Love First Christians. We have people who transitioned in the Love First Christians. For them to come to the Holy Spirit and God's truth for them was their own journey. And I needed to treat them as individuals. And these people are full, especially the ones that I'm thinking of, because they participate so heavily, full of this love and peace and grace and wonderful stuff that you would really appreciate. And this is what saved me from being a bigot. I went on the same journey as Richard B. Hayes. I was very anti the stuff because I played identity politics with them. I collectivized them all. Right. And I shouldn't have done it. I should have judged them by their works. And that changed everything for me. So I guess that would be what I would encourage listeners to do. By their works, you shall know them, and kind of go from there.
A lot of food for thought. I could respond to a lot of that, but we are, you have the privilege, Hodey, of being the final, commenter of the show, so your word gets to stand without pushback. I won't hijack I'm not going to abuse my host privileges to open up the arguments again.
In debate, the last word always wins, right? I mean, that's how
right. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, I always hope that's how I always hope to be the negative when I did debate.
Sure.
Yeah. So it's just easier to argue against someone than to argue for something. Anyway, no, a lot of fun. I enjoy these conversations. There's a lot about both of your perspectives where even in our disagreements, I agree with a lot of the stuff in there, right? So and I kind of feel like we do get off at different stations, but we're on the same train, to invoke a commonly invoked metaphor. But what did I say? Yeah, same train, different. I don't know. I'm tired. I might have bumbled that a little bit. The grace of God will cover me for that. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in and watching live. Those of you watching on the audio, listening on the audio side, like, subscribe, 5-star reviews, all that's really good. libertarianchristians.com. Follow me at Biblical Anarchy. I am going to go eat dinner and go to sleep. Talk to y'all next time.